Finally, here we are. The Formula One Spanish Grand Prix weekend is set to take place at the Circuit de Catalunya, Barcelona, as the TD018 technical directive comes into effect, and Ferrari has high expectations. Hope that might not be rewarded, since every time we have seen an in-season change, it has never gone well for the Prancing Horse. Otherwise, we are talking about a very peculiar track where compromises are different, and the interaction between aerodynamics and mechanics will be decisive. The Prancing Horse's technicians and engineers are aware they have to limit the weaknesses of the SF25 single-seater. The Maranello team arrives at Montmeló after concluding a good weekend in the Monaco Principality. However, it is crucial to remember that Monte Carlo is a track apart, requiring a radical setup, different and free from the need to seek the usual compromises mentioned above. In Monaco, in fact, there was the possibility to do well despite the difficulties suffered by the Italian car in terms of qualifying performance. Ferrari team principal Frédéric Vasseur confirmed it. The SF25 does not easily allow finding the right balance of the car when it has to simultaneously optimize fast and slow corners. Last weekend, on the streets of Monte Carlo, this scenario did not appear, but in Catalonia, on the contrary, the central challenge of the weekend is precisely this. Ferrari needs an extra effort to improve efficiency related to setup. In some previous rounds, especially the Chinese Grand Prix, the Maranello team's car showed a more competitive configuration. That is why we can trust that the team knows how to react even in these circumstances. At the same time, it is also true that the Italian team has often been forced to adopt an overly extreme setup, necessary to cover various technical shortcomings. The SF25 car suffers a downforce deficit at all speeds. Charles Leclerc has said this several times, emphasizing that the wing not optimized for low speeds makes the car less competitive in the more technical sectors compared to other cars, although traction is not a problem. This dynamic will test the ability to find the right compromise, a decisive element for tackling the Barcelona circuit. Another critical issue for the Ferrari engineers and technicians concerns the thermal management of the tires. This coming weekend, the difficulty in controlling the temperature inside the compound represents an important challenge for all teams, so therefore also for rivals McLaren, Red Bull, and Mercedes. In the race, the SF25 single-seater continues to struggle to stabilize the internal tire temperatures, a condition that could negatively impact overall performance. In qualifying, managing the compound on a flying lap could be equally problematic. Warming up the tires should not be an issue, while keeping them in the correct window throughout the lap will not be easy at all. Regarding surface temperature, Ferrari seems to be able to control it quite well compared to some competitors, especially over the 300-kilometer distance. However, at the Circuit de Catalunya in Barcelona, the internal temperature will matter more. Managing this important element will make a big difference. That is why the work on Friday's free practice sessions will be very important, when we will have the first and possible confirmation of what has been said. The basic setup, characterized by insufficient vertical load, produces a baseline gap that the Prancing Horse must inevitably deal with. For this reason, the historic team's strategy must focus on a setup oriented mainly towards the race, capable of improving the thermal management of all types of compounds. Building a setup to optimize the car on two fronts: aerodynamic stability and thermal efficiency, a fundamental aspect to try to close the gap with the front runners on a track that puts every configuration to a tough test. At the same time, it is worth pointing out that Ferrari has completely modified the construction of the front wing, which was submitted for inspection at the FIA garage in Barcelona. This could be seen already on Thursday thanks to the images from various journalists and reporters who had the opportunity to be in the Barcelona pit lane and photograph the evolved version that will debut at the Spanish Grand Prix to comply with the updated FIA rules on deflection that come into force at this event, the 9th of the 2025 Formula One Championship. The Prancing Horse team is introducing only this update at Montmeló, reportedly pairing it with a rear wing taken from last year's inventory, just as already happened at the Imola circuit in the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix weekend. Diego Tondi's staff has completely redesigned the front wing, which must now adhere to much stricter flexion criteria due to the technical directive that was decided and approved before the start of the season. The original text stated that when a 100-kilogram load is applied symmetrically to both elements of the front wing, vertical deflection must not exceed 15 millimeters, while if the force is applied to only one side of the wing, the deflection must not exceed 20 mm. Article 3, 15.4 stated that placing a 100 kg load on both profiles of the front wing, 800 mm from the center line, the vertical deflection should not exceed 15 mm, and if the force was applied to only one side, the deflection should not exceed 20 mm. The FIA has changed these figures, limiting deflection to 10 mm under dual-sided load and 15 mm under single-sided load. As for the flexibility of the flaps, the regulation previously stated that any part of the trailing edge of each front wing element could not flex more than 5 mm, measured along the load axis, when a 6 kg point load was applied perpendicularly to the flap. From this Grand Prix onward, the allowed deflection will be just 3 mm. The intervention by Nicolas Tombazis, FIA's single-seater technical director, is significant, and teams have had to revise not only the design, but also the construction of the front wing. To give the teams the necessary time to adapt, the FIA chose to postpone the entry into force of the directive precisely to the Spanish GP. Nicolas Tombazis explained the reasons behind the decision and why the directive had not been applied immediately. The former Ferrari racing car designer said that, during several races starting from the Belgian Grand Prix, the FIA had installed cameras on the front wings of all cars and concluded that the tests needed to be made more stringent. However, he noted that this conclusion had been reached quite late in the season, and the FIA believed that introducing stricter tests at the start of the following season would have placed an excessive burden on the teams. Such a move, he pointed out, could have led to the rejection of existing front wings and additional costs. Therefore, they considered a delayed introduction to be the more reasonable approach. Nicolas Tombazis also pointed out how it is precisely the rivalries between teams that push them to seek out and report any technical irregularities of their rivals, forcing the FIA to intervene accordingly. The differences are easily observable because the main profile, which previously followed a carbon fiber layout inclined at about 45 degrees, now has a different orientation parallel to the direction of travel, exactly the opposite of what can be seen in the second element, which also serves a structural function by connecting to the nose and providing support. In particular, it is noticeable that the connection between the four elements and the end plate has been completely revised with new inserts, and in the available photographs, one can see the different camber of the end plate. This is a part sensitive to programmed deformation movements. The last two flaps themselves have reoriented fibers and a different design along their trailing edge.